Her skin felt like sun-warmed glass. Commander Kalen Vance stood so close to Empress Cilia he could feel the faint, rhythmic hum vibrating beneath her collarbone. He shouldn't be this close. It violated every Terran protocol on the books. But then she tilted her head, her dark eyes locking onto his, and whispered a question that made the air catch in his throat. In that exact second, the walls of the palace, the very crust of the planet, ignited into a blinding, planet-wide bioluminescence. It turned out diplomacy by accident was the Terran way. 3 days earlier, the tension had been entirely different. Vance and Lieutenant Alara Thorne had descended through Xylos's shimmering atmosphere to initiate formal first contact. The capital city was a breathtaking expanse of living crystal, vibrating with a quiet resonance that set Vance's teeth on edge. Their mission was simple: present diplomatic offerings to Empress Cilia and Chancellor Zoran, secure a foothold in the sector. He had rehearsed the steps: 3 paces, a deep bow, the offering of Terran data spools. But the floor of the throne room was seamless, frictionless crystal. His boot caught on a raised fractal ridge. Vance pitched forward. His hands threw themselves out to brace his fall, finding instead a slender, towering spire of carved light, a 3,000-year-old sacred Xylari memorial sculpture. It didn't just break. It detonated into a million glittering shards that rained across the silent hall. Chancellor Zoran had looked ready to order an immediate execution. Instead, Empress Cilia had risen from her throne. She hadn't looked angry. She had looked utterly fascinated by the vulnerable, sprawling Terran on her floor. The executions never came. Cilia halted the proceedings and dismissed her guards. She demanded isolated, closed-door meetings with the clumsy commander. At first, Vance thought it was an interrogation. He sat across from her in a quiet chamber, the soft glow of holograms casting long shadows between them. But she didn't ask about Terran weapons or fleet sizes. She asked about how humans chose their mates, how they handled grief, how they held each other when the night was too quiet, and Vance found himself answering. He watched the way the crystalline facets along her jawline shifted color when he spoke about Earth. The quiet space between their words grew heavier with every session. He noticed the way her breath hitched when he explained the concept of holding hands. She didn't understand why her chest tightened. He didn't understand why he kept leaning closer. Truth is, a shattered artifact births the universe's most dangerous interstellar alliance. They were just 2 people sitting in a room pretending they were still talking about politics, which led them to the royal gardens, standing inches apart. Cilia reached out, her fingertips hovering just above the thick fabric of his uniform. The heat radiating from her was magnetic. "Commander Vance," she murmured, her voice carrying a strange musical friction. "I have read your texts on pair bonding, and I find myself requiring a partner to navigate the coming storms." She stepped into his space. "I am asking if you are claimed." He couldn't breathe. Before he could form a response, her emotions spilled over. The crystalline flora around them flared a brilliant, undeniable crimson. The light rushed outward, a wave of bioluminescence that cascaded through the palace, down the spires, and across the entire planet. Footsteps shattered the moment. Chancellor Zoran stormed into the garden, bathed in the scandalous red light. "Empress," Zoran gasped, glaring at Vance. "Your display. The entire system sees it. The Drakari faction has intercepted the signal. Warlord Vorath considers this an insult to their proposed treaty." Vance slowly stepped back, the warmth of her leaving his skin cold. He swallowed hard. They had just incited a galactic diplomatic crisis. The air in the throne room tasted like static and fear. Warlord Vorath did not walk. He impacted the floor. The Drakari commander was a mountain of dark scales and scarred armor, his heavy battle cruiser humming ominously in the courtyard outside. Vorth hurled his gauntlet down, the heavy metal clattering against the frictionless crystal. A formal challenge, a battle to the death. Vance felt the cold draft of the vast hall sink into his bones. But his eyes weren't on the towering warlord. They were on Cilia. Her crystalline crown flared a sharp, jagged violet color of raw panic. She stepped in front of him, an instinctive shield, her hand trembling just enough for Vance to notice. He hated the way her fear felt heavy in his own chest. He stepped around her, his shoulder brushing hers, a silent promise. He wasn't going to let her fight this alone. But before Vorath could ignite his plasma blade, the palace alarm screamed. It was a sound that vibrated deep in the teeth. Holographic displays burst into existence above the dais, washing the room in the harsh, flat light of deep space sensor telemetry. An artificially triggered stellar collapse. The Omega sector was tearing itself apart. 3 populated worlds caught in the gravity well of a dying star. Vance stared at the data. He looked at Vorus' massive, violent frame. He looked at the gentle, humming resonance of Cilia's living architecture, and something clicked. "The trial is paused," Vance said, his voice cutting through the klaxons. Vorath bared needle-like teeth, but Vance didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped closer to the warlord, pointing at the dying star in the hologram. "You want to prove who is stronger?" Vance asked, his pulse hammering a frantic rhythm against his collar. "Help me kill a star." Truth is, breaking rigid traditions was the only way to forge sustainable progress. Vance didn't offer a fist. He offered a grid. He orchestrated the madness in real time. It was a chaotic 3-way military operation. He stood between Cilia and Vorath, his hands flying across the tactical interface, the heat of the Drakari warlord on his left, and the soothing rhythmic hum of the Xylari Empress on his right. "Vorath, push your warships to these coordinates," Vance ordered, his throat dry. "Cilia, deploy your resonance tech on his hulls. We don't fight the collapse. We guide it." Reframing destructive anomalies into tools for preservation, that was the Terran way. They watched the monitors, breathless. The Drakari engines screamed, carrying the delicate singing crystals of Xylos directly into the fire. The resonance frequencies hit the collapsing star, catching the chaotic magnetic fields, squeezing the mass inward. A blinding flash. Then, silence. The star didn't go supernova. It compressed, shrinking down into a dense, stable white dwarf. The Omega sector was safe. Vorath stared at the telemetry, his broad chest heaving. He slowly turned to Vance. The warlord's hardened expression cracked. It turned out, when the galaxy's fiercest warriors are outmaneuvered by the power of coordination, they don't rage, they bow. "The challenge is conceded," Vorath rumbled, the sound vibrating through the floorboards. He looked at Cilia, then at the human who had commanded them both. "Your mate has value, Empress." When the heavy doors finally hissed shut behind the Drakari delegation, the silence left behind was deafening. Vance exhaled, leaning heavily against the holographic console. His muscles shook from the adrenaline crash. Then he felt it, the soft, sun-warmed glass of her hand sliding over his. Cilia stepped into his space, her bioluminescence settling into a deep, steady gold. The crisis was over, but the gravity between them had only intensified. "You saved them," she whispered, her gaze dropping to where their fingers tangled together. "You saved us. We did it together," Vance replied softly. Over the next few months, that collaboration became permanent. They sat shoulder to shoulder in the labs, engineering new diplomatic translation devices. It wasn't just about parsing language anymore. It was about true integration, understanding the heavy size, the shift in skin temperature, the colors of a Xylari heartbeat. The Galactic Council saw the data. They didn't just approve the union. They weaponized it, appointing Vance and Cilia to lead a newly established cultural integration program across the universe. But in the quiet dark of their quarters, none of the titles mattered. Vance reached up, tracing the smooth, crystalline edge of her jaw. Cilia leaned into his touch, closing her eyes as a soft pink glow flushed through her collarbone. He didn't need a translator to know what that meant. He just needed her to stay exactly where she was.